Go live. Nope.
Here we go. We got it.
Yeah.
So are you seeing the YouTube?
Yeah, and they're picking my teeth right now on there. Hi, everybody.
Sorry. Okay, well, let me just go ahead. I apologize for all our technical difficulties, but we finally gotten started. Welcome to the April General Meeting of the Oregon Mycological Society. I'm Joe Cohen, the president. A few words before we get to our speaker. As many of you have probably noticed, the spring season for mushrooms is slowly starting. There are reports of some edibles at lower elevations. Of course, those of you in Portland know that we got some snow last night, so higher elevations will be problematic. In general, we are trying to move the society to more live events, and we're trying to be very cautious given where COVID is. So we will get back to you with news about that. We will have a live spring camp. It filled up within several days of our sending notice out to the members. And we should have some field trips that are going to be coming up that will be arranged by our field trip coordinator, Kim Robinson. Given all that, let me move on to the reason that I think all of you are here, which is to hear Trent and Kristen Blizzard. They're going to talk about how to hunt burn morels, tips and tricks. They are self-proclaimed modern foragers who live in Wisconsin. They trek the forests of the Midwest and Colorado and Pacific Northwest looking for wild edible mushrooms. It started with them as a hobby and became an obsession. Both of them are certified wild mushroom experts in Colorado and some other states. And one of the really interesting things about them is that they use modern ways of trying to find places to look for mushrooms. Things like digital mapping, social media, GPS, phone apps, and satellite internet on the road. Recently, they've collaborated to author a new book called Wild Mushrooms, a cookbook and foraging guide. And it has lots of tips and tricks for harvesting and great recipes. So without further ado, let me turn things over to Trent.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Joe, for the introduction. Let me get a little screen sharing going on here. And I've got some fun burn morel stuff to share with you all today. Kristen's here. She's around the corner. I think I'm going to do the presentation today. Just to kind of revise the bio you read out there. We actually live in Oregon during the winters now, and we spend the winters out in Reedsport, and we spend 6 months out here in Wisconsin. So we kind of get the best of both worlds. We get to kind of chase mushrooms in the Midwestern forest and then head out in late fall to Oregon and then chase there. We just landed back in Wisconsin yesterday after being out in Oregon for a while. So, okay, let me see what I got here. I don't like the screen sharing that's going on. Let me change my share a little bit here and make it a little better look. I think that's going to be a little better look for us here. Now, great. So let me get started. I'm going to talk about a couple of things today with burn morels. I want to start by just big picture, talk about burn morels, what they are from kind of a species level. I want to talk about big map picture. I want to look at the whole state and kind of talk about generally where they grow, and then maybe hone in on some of the forests. And then from there, maybe we'll start looking at burn perimeters and looking on a map at some burns, and then some things when you're in the burn, how to find morels. Now we have a chat going over here, I think, in YouTube. If you guys have any questions, it's a great place to pop in your questions. We'll watch those. Joe, feel free to jump in and ask questions, especially if it's kind of on track with where we're going. I know you're monitoring the chat. I don't mind being interrupted if a question is kind of timely to what I'm looking at right in the moment. Okay, so here's Kristen and I and our two dogs, Benzie and Lulu. And we've been chasing morels and burns, I don't know, 6 or 7 years now, maybe. We're fairly new to this. And it kind of has been a really obsessive hobby for us. And a lot of that has kind of come out of the kind of joy of doing digital mapping. And I spend a lot of time all winter looking on maps to find where the burns are. And we've been in probably, I don't know, 40 or 50 burns over the years. From we lived in Colorado for many years. We hunted there. Oregon mainly is the state we hunt, but also Washington, California, Idaho. I think this year is going to be a Montana year for us. But they grow all over the West. So in terms of morels and how they work, I think we have to agree on these points right here. And this is not from a mycologist standpoint. This is from a morel hunter standpoint. Number one is they're polymorphic. They can look a lot of different ways. And you can't necessarily judge a species by the size, the color, the shape. They really have a lot of variation in the way they look. They're highly predictable, yet they behave unpredictably. And what I mean by that is there's certain things that really trigger large fruitings of morels. And if those things aren't in place, you're not going to see them. They're really, slaves to Mother Nature. Yet they behave unpredictably. They show up in weird places where you don't expect them. You can find them occasionally in all kinds of places. And they have a sense of irony, I think. You go out and spend a whole day hunting and you come back and there's one boom right next to your car or in your backyard or, at work along the sidewalk. They do seem to have that sense of humor in where they're located. It's very hard to classify them down to the species. It's hard for mycologists. There's a lot of DNA testing going on. The species are getting revised, it feels like, continually. So that's difficult. We're going to look at some species in a minute here. Now, this is one area I call them mycorrhizal. I think, scientifically speaking, you probably could dispute that. However, from our standpoint, they live with the trees. They associate with specific trees. And if you don't understand the trees, you're really not going to understand the morels very well. And it's interesting to look at people giving morel advice around the country, look up how to find morels. People are dead set. You're going to find these things in ash trees, or you're going to find them with tulip trees, or you're going to find them with elm trees or apple orchards. But then you come out to Oregon and you're like, that's completely different here. You find them in the mountains with conifer trees, for instance, among other places. So I have that last point. They shop local, depending where you are, and your how they grow is heavily dependent on the region. They're very localized, and whether it's Michigan or Oregon, you use completely different strategies to find morels. Now, burn morels have three characteristics. Number one, they only grow in conifer forests. Number two, they only grow in the Western US. And number three, they only grow after a fire. Now, I said morels are unpredictable. Now that I've told you the three ironclad rules, I'd like to give you a couple of exceptions. But I want to point out, this is really what I'm really clear about that you guys want to get. Burn morels don't necessarily grow just somewhere where it burned. Burn morels grow in Western forests that have experienced a forest fire, and they come up in massive quantities. You may indeed find burn morels in somebody's yard if their house burned down. You may find them in a fire pit or around a campfire. you can find them in a lot of places, but I'm talking about the ones that fruit in massive quantities in forest fires. These are properly known as burn morels, at least in my presentation. So a few exceptions, though, are right here. They found them 4 times that we know of outside of the western half of the U.S. Here in the continental U.S., we've got a Tennessee, a Michigan, an Ontario, and a Minnesota sighting that have been all been proven to be burn morels. They're pretty rare, though, that in 4 times that they found them east of the Mississippi in this case. So it's pretty unusual. They have very occasionally been found with non-conifer trees. That seems pretty rare as well. So, and they grow on the burns. So we've got 6 species that we keep our eye on here as burn morels. And I'd like to start at the bottom of this list because as you work up, they become more kind of iconically burn morels and also really, really specific and endemic to burns. So we've got the bottom 2 there, Snyderi and Brunia, Morchella Snyderi and Morchella Brunia. I think those are commonly found in burns. However, I don't know if you can say they're exclusively found in burns. I think it's going to take a few more years of DNA testing to really get a grip on, are they almost always in burns, or are they 50-50? The exuberans, I think, is largely a burn morel. The next 2, the sextulatas and the exemias, are, I think, pretty much exclusively burns. You might find them outside of a burn. They're very hard to tell apart from each other. The morphologically speaking, you can't look at them and say that's a sextulata or that's an exemia. You can take a guess, but you're really going to have to run it through a DNA test to tell which one it is for sure. And then we've got the kind of big one of them all, the Morchella tomentosa. That's the iconic burn morel. It's the biggest, the best, the most exciting. It's the last one to typically come up when they fruit in succession, and it's a beautiful mushroom. We call them fuzzy feet. We call them black morels. They're beautiful. Here's some pictures of some that I cut one in half there. This picture was actually taken in Oregon near Prospect a couple of years ago, and these are all those fuzzy feet. You can kind of see the base. You can see if you looked really close at the stipe in here, there'd be like little hairs in there. But they start out real small and tight and compact, and they might be black or they might be gray. And as they age, they'll look a little different. These ones are in Colorado. And I got some more pictures in a minute. So these are back to it. These are kind of the specific species we're chasing. And what's interesting too about them is they come up in flushes. So one particular acre of land might have 2, 3, 4 different flushes of burn morels over a month-long period as they work through their succession of flushes. Now, I would also say that there's I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to keep going here. Now, let's talk about kind of how you find them, and back to this idea that they're unpredictable. But I'm not talking about like you might find them here. Somebody once found them on the coast, or somebody once found them there. I'm really talking about where we can find these guys reliably and go pick buckets of them. So let's start with a map of the area. Here's the kind of PNW, a little more Oregon centric. And we've got our state forest right there and color coded. And burn morels generally do better as you go from west to east. So over here in the west, in the Siuslaw and the Rogue, is going to be the place I would be the least excited to find them. They're there for sure. You can find them, and when conditions are right, you can find a lot of them, but they're not as reliable. And as you get over the coastal range and get down into the valley here and start heading back up the sides of the Cascades here, on the western side of the Cascades is going to be the next best. And that's where, like last year, I think a lot of the fires were. I think the picking gets really top notch, and it's pretty good on the west side. It gets top notch as you tip over the Cascades and get on the east side of them. And then as you follow those through the Choco, Malheur, and into the, I guess the Blue Mountains are what we called it, this area over here, the Wallowa Whitman. I'm about 50-50 on pronouncing some of these forest names, as I'm sure many of you are too. They can be difficult to pronounce. The thing about them, though, timing wise, is they're also going to move from west to east, and north to south to some degree, but more so west to east as the season progresses. And that's strictly a matter of elevation. Maybe we were out there 2 weeks ago and we were under 2,000 feet, and the west facing slopes of the Cascades, and they were just starting to come out on, this case, southern exposures where it was a little warmer. We were starting to find them, and they were there. But that was 2,000 feet. If we wait another month and go up to, say, 3,500 feet, I think we start finding more and more in bigger quantities. The other advantage of waiting a month and getting into the higher elevations is not only are they tend to be more abundant, all things being equal, they also don't have bugs in them. If you do find bugs, you're often in the lower elevation, western slopes of the Cascades. And, that said, it's April. If you can go out and find burn morels, that's awesome, and we'll live with a few bugs. But if you wait till May, usually the bugs will disappear. Let me just look at the questions here. I like Heidi's comment. Yeah, the irony is not species specific. That's true, but man, morels are extra ironic. Bear, we'll talk about that. They do pop up for several years. All right, let's keep looking on here. So now I switched the maps. This was just like a public access map because this is where they grow. They grow in these big forests that have a lot of trees that almost are always federal land. There are some areas, there's some state land that's not marked here. There's also tribal land, which is not marked here, and you're going to want to stay off of that for sure. National parks, you obviously don't want to be there. You can see Crater Lake down in here, and this picture is not colored, and you can't pick around that in a national park. Now, this is a vegetation map. Really, it's a tree map. And if we look here, and we start on the far western edge here, we've got the purple, that's the Sitka spruce, redwood. This is pretty rare to find them in there. You go a little bit further east, and you're in this east, you're in the western hemlock. And that's where you might find some of those early season ones. There's no trees here in the valley, but then as we start heading back up the Cascade, you're back into the western hemlock, and you can see that's going to flow into our mountain hemlock here in the red, and in the pink, we've got this silver fir showing up. And we're also getting down here in the south in the blue, we're starting to get the grand fir, and the red, let's see, then we go to the blue, that's the grand fir, and then the orange, the ponderosa. We're going to skip the juniper, that's no good. And we're going to come back to the east where you've got the ponderosa and the white fir, grand fir. And that's really probably the territory that I get the most excited about. I really like the grand firs. I tend to really chase my mushrooms, my burn morels in this grand fir forest when I can. But the mountain hemlock forest, the duck fir forest, those produce pretty well. The ponderosa forest too. The biggest flush we've ever found has been under a ponderosa tree after a burn. However, I've kind of been hit or miss in the pondos. I'd be curious if anybody here chats what they think about the pondos for the burns. But certainly any of this mixed conifer forest is really ultimately what you want. Sometimes when you're in straight Doug fir, straight pine, anything like straight up mono tree is usually not as exciting as a mix. And these don't show all the tree species too. For instance, cedar is not on here, and cedar is a totally good tree to find burn morels with as well. But I think this map really illustrates kind of what's going on. And over here in the Blue Mountains, which have the blue of the grand fir, and then they've got this light blue subalpine. This is a great place over here as you go to the east to find burn morels. And it's also typically less crowded. So I think I'll pop on to the next slide after this and talk a little bit now about maps. And if that was big picture where they grow in the state, let's talk about how to find the perimeters. They're all over the internet, but for free. I got some sites here: InstaWeb, Gaia GPS, Onyx Maps. Those are all paid. Excuse me, Gaia and Onyx are paid. CalTopo. I don't know if they have birds yet up this year. We have our modern forager maps, and that's what I'll spend time in today as kind of my demo maps to take a look at some maps. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to pop over to our modern forager site here and look at a few things. Number one is, here's our, let me go back. Let me just start. Like, the big problem here, if I go to all burns, the big problem with kind of if you're starting is like, where do you start? There's fires just everywhere. And there's, hundreds of thousands of acres, millions of acres really is what's burned here, millions. It's hard to figure out where to start. So what we do is what I do all winter is I go through all these fires, I look at them on satellite, I look at them on topo maps, I determine if they're public or not, I rate them, and then I organize them into what I call the curated map, where I sort the best into A, B's, and C's. So I take all those ones you saw. These are the ones I think of, all those that will hold mushrooms, and then I sort them so you can just go look at the top burns, and if you want, you can kind of investigate those. And there's a lot of them this year. This year across the West, there's more burns than probably any 2 years combined in terms of the Morel potential of these burns. And the thing that's really unique is, you've had big fire years in Oregon and also in California for 2 or 3 years. But this year there's 10 A-rated fires in California, Oregon, Washington, Montana, and Idaho. And there's also some really good fires in Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. So it's really, no matter where you live, you're going to have access to some kind of premier burn morel hunting. It's just not in Oregon. And the side effect of that is my standards were pretty high this year. A lot of my B-rated fires right here would have in previous years been a A-rated fire, and C fires might have been a B fire. And a lot of fires didn't even make the cut. This year I ran my filters and I eliminated any burn that was like less than 2 acres, just because there were so many little spot fires that I didn't want to muck up the map with them. So there's a lot of fires. Let me zoom out here, and you can see the state here. And in my map, so I'm curious, it's the Oregon Mycological. So you guys are across the whole state. So I assume we've got a lot of people up here in the Portland area too that are going to be part of this group. And you're going to want to pay attention to the Washington map, because there's a lot of fires in Washington, obviously. But most of our big fires this year are running down, right down the Cascades, and they often are on the kind of in the middle or on the western, which is a good sign. There's not a lot of them out here in the eastern part of the state that are very promising though. So we start with a simple Oregon or a simple Google map. We can show terrain. You can zoom in and you can get the satellite for these, and the satellite map is really essential to be able to come in and look at the quality of the trees and the land in there. But the map that you use kind of day to day, and the most handy, is going to be this Forest Service map, because I'm going to zoom in on this. The Forest Service map is going to have the topography lines that you can quickly scan. Like in this map, you can see this area right here. It's pretty flat. The topography has spread apart. And I think it's a east-facing slope right here. I'd have to double check that. It looks like it's dropping off to the right. I can't be positive though. And over here, there's a nice flat area. They have roads coming into them, and I don't really trust the Google. I don't trust the Google roads as much as these Forest Service roads. So I like to use it for that. And then I'll pop over and look at the satellite and try to evaluate the trees in here. So I use this map a lot to just find access points into the fire. This Forest Service map, it'll have campgrounds on it as well. We have a couple of fun new maps this year. Let me zoom out again to show a few fires. The first map was my new this year, is called Morel Hot Spots. and I'll zoom in on this. And I colorize the different areas that are kind of more exciting to find the morels in. And I rate the color. I do and I have a whole article on it. We can break it down. If you get in here, you can look and see how I do it. But I base the rating on a couple of factors. Number one is tree cover. The more trees there are, the higher the rating. Number two is the slope. It needs to be less than 30% and even more if it's less than 15% slope. And that's because it's easy to walk on. When you're evaluating this terrain, you got to find places you can walk. And when you get above 30%, morels love steeps. They're all over the steeps, but they're very difficult to pick and exhausting and even dangerous. So I try to avoid areas that are steep. And then the third thing we do in this particular map is we do boost the northern exposures, or maybe a better way to put it is we ding the southern facing exposures, because typically we're trying to avoid southern exposures because typically it's dry and hot and we're looking for cooler and moisture environments. Now, we just were out there and it was very early in the season. It was still March, and we were focused on southern exposures because we wanted the warmest place we could find because it was really early in the season. But normally we don't do we don't really do the southern exposures. And if you come in here, you'll see, like, here's a big yellow area, and you can pop over to satellite and you can see the trees. There's a lot of trees. And you can pop over to the Forest Service map and you can see it's pretty flat in here. So those kind of brighter spots are a little more promising than if you go in here where it's grayed out here. It's just so steep, it didn't make the cut. There weren't even enough trees. So it's just a quick way to eyeball these burns and see. Now, the other thing that's in the map this year is new is this burn severity rating. So let me click on that. I don't have them for all the burns, and I'll explain why, but I think it's a pretty useful map. Generally, we are looking for places that are not burnt like down to the ground or overburnt. And we're also looking for places that actually burn. So we don't want them to be like unburned. And what this burn severity map does is we find a satellite picture before and after the burn. And it's called a difference. We subtract one picture from the other to see the difference between the two pictures. And we look at the infrared spectrum when we do that from the satellites. And basically, because that reflects off of the plant life better, it will show us the change in green in these burns. So in this burn down here in the kind of southeast Oregon, the giant bootleg burn, and down here we've got Cougar Peak, and what's this little one down here, Patton Meadows. When you click in and look at them, it's kind of tough. These guys, even though there's big, nice, bright, nice looking areas in here, when you go look at the burn severity, they might have burnt pretty hard. And I might be a little cautious, about those spots. Now, you never know till you go and put your eyes on it. But generally, I try to avoid, if I zoom in here, I'm a little nervous, like hunting in these dark red areas that typically when you go and look, they're just like ash on the ground. They're burnt pretty hard. So typically we will be careful in those spots. If you wonder, by the way, why some I don't have these for, it's because I couldn't always get before and after satellite pictures that were cloud free. Clouds are the problem. This is that, I think, is that the, okay, I thought that was a different fire. That's Chaos Fire. And you can see on it, it's got a lot of green and some little red hot spots, a lot of yellow. This burn, I look at it and go, ooh, this is like not too hot. It's probably going to be really easy picking. There'll be a lot of shade, big trees left, a lot of live trees still, and it could theoretically just be loaded with mushrooms. However, I do, and you can see I have like my notes in here, like for each one. Oops. When it flies out, I talk about how big it is and kind of my impression of it, what the elevation range is that you're going to find in here. And I say it's a little steep because when you come back and look at this map, and zoom in, this is pretty steep territory. You're not going to like hop off the trail and go cross country. You're gonna be really looking for spots you can get in here and hunt. It's not like giant flat areas, unfortunately. Now again, there's going to be a lot of morels in there, but you're just going to have to work a little harder to find those spots because it is kind of steep. All right, so that's this map. So we use these to find which fire we're going to go to. We want to evaluate the fire for access. I'm going to talk about how to evaluate in a second. I want to show the tree map, a tree map or two here though. This is this year's fires laid out on a tree species map. So we can zoom in here. And over on the left, we'll wait for this to load up for a second. There's a lot of data in here. And what I've got, I've checked spruce, hemlock, Doug fir, and fir. Here it comes. And so if I uncheck, I can uncheck and we can start seeing. So it's not like a lot of spruce in there. There's a lot of Doug fir in this whole area. Now you can come in and you can change your, the ways that you see it if you want. There's a lot of ways to slice and dice this data. I'm not going to change it right now, but here's the legend, and you can see, how many trees are in this area. But you can come in and just check the firs, and if you want, you can pick a kind of fir. So here's the grand fir, for instance, which is one that I really like. I'm going to uncheck this, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And now we're going to get just a grand fir map. It'll take a minute to load. But if that's a tree you're looking for, you can see if that starts on the western slope or the eastern slope of the Cascades. Most of these fires over here are on the western slope of the Cascades. And they're still going to be wonderful to pick, don't get me wrong. But it's fun if any of you are into researching tree species. A map like this can really help you find where the most trees are that associate with the mushroom you're looking for. Also in here, if you want just something a little different, I've got the timber cut map, and this has thins and harvest from the 2021 season. I'm hoping in the next week I'm adding 2020 now. I'm not done with it yet. But these will break down, let me click in here. These are areas that have been logged or timbered or thinned. And you can click in here and it will show you this was a commercial thin. It was completed May 30th in 2021. Elevation is about 4,300 feet. So I do have some data in here to kind of learn more about it if you want to see commercial thin. I guess most of these are going to fall into that category right now. Commercial thin. So if you are looking to do something a little different and get out of the burns and go look in these timber cuts, you can use this map to help with that. And generally the naturals, based on, I'm not a real expert in them, but I've asked some people, they seem to fruit like 2 weeks ahead of the burn morels, probably because the burn morels like a slightly higher soil temperature than the naturals that fruit in a logged forest. So often morel hunters are focused on these timber areas here in April, and then in May they'll move over to the higher elevation burns for the burn morels is often what morel hunters are doing in Oregon right now. I don't know if that jives with what you guys have got here. Sharon, you're asking what tree species are morels most associated with? The burn morels, they like mixed conifer. There's all kinds, but certainly I love grand fir, but I find them in ponderosas, Doug firs, hemlocks, cedars are really good. So often the reality is you're looking for a mixed forest, not like a monolithic Doug fir forest, which they might be there too. Don't get me wrong. Okay, so I saw that question, Sharon. I want to make sure you got it answered. Back to this, we hopped into the burns. We looked at the perimeters. We did a little map research. Let me go through the basics here on that. Soil temp is what a lot of people look at, and I put this picture in here. You might want to look at it for a minute, see if you see what I'm seeing. Like in this picture, what do you see? What you see are a meat thermometer next to two different morels. These are in the same forest, taken probably a month apart. And there the morels are popping. And here's what this blows my mind. The one on the left was very early in the spring. It's got a very warm temperature. The one on the right was taken weeks later, and it's got a cooler temperature. Yet there's a morel. I've stuck thermometers in the forest floor a lot, and I find there's a wide range of ground temps that they come up in, and anywhere from the high 40s to the mid 50s, we're finding them. So you just can't go stick it. It's not like people think you can just stick it in the ground and tell what's going on. And as you do this more, here's what's weird. If you do it at different times of the day, the temperature goes up during the day. So it changes. If you do it in a shady or sunny spot, you get a big jump in the soil temperature changes by several degrees based on the sun. Just as you move over like a couple of feet away, it could change. The other one, look on the right. Look how deep my thermometer is plunged into the ground on the right. If you do this and measure it, this is wrong. I should have put it all the way in. I try to put it in all the way in all the time, so it's always the same depth. Because if you change the depth, the temperature goes up and down. So there's a lot of variables. I would caution hanging a hat on soil temp. Although it's still important, you just can't rely on it. You can't plunge a thermometer in the soil and know exactly where they're at. I'll tell you the story on this one in a minute. However, that soil temperature will change into what you need based on, number one, is aspect. So north versus south and east versus west here. Northern facing slopes are considerably cooler. Probably you could go on a northern facing slope at 3,000 feet. And if you went to a south facing slope, you could go to 3,500 or 3,700 feet and it would be the same temperature. It can be like a 500-foot difference north to south. East and west tend to be more even. I love hunting east and west slopes. I like the way every little undulation in the land or kind of little valley has a north and a south exposure. When you're in the east and west slope, it doesn't like face east and west. There's all these little northern and southern exposures too. So I like to hunt those. I like to hunt them all, except I avoid the southern facing exposures often as the season progresses. And don't do as well. But you can try to find through elevation multiple flushes. So the first flush will often be a 500, 1,000 feet above the last flush. And if you sit in one place, you can pick for 3 or 4 weeks in a row as they move through the flushes. With this final one, the gray ones being the last ones. And here's two little beauties. Again, those are the Morchella tomentosas, the fuzzy feet or black feet. They've got a lot of different names. We often try to chase that first flush, but the second and third flushes can be very productive. So if you're trying to find the right elevation, think about the aspect. What we got here? This is a picture taken in June. Let me just look at. I got the dates on this. And I think what was kind of interesting to me here, if I can just find my notes, we picked the same forest, the same spot, the same elevation for 4 weeks straight, and this was like the third week. This was before the tomentosas came out. So this was the last flush before the tomentosas. And when we stuck around another week, we had a different pile of mushrooms that looked different on from that same land. And what we found was that in this particular spot, and this was in Colorado, we were at 8,000 feet in June, the first week of June picking, which was like the first they came out. And we were at 10,000 feet through the middle of August picking. So we were able to pretty much stay very close to the same area, just going up the mountain and go through June and July and August, picking up the elevation range. So if you can find the right place in the fire, you can usually locate these mushrooms. And that's why I like the western slope, because my experience is that on, the eastern slope of the Cascades, that you take any given acre of land that has good trees on it, and you're going to find a lot of morels in it. If you go to the western slope, you take any acre of land, the morels are going to maybe be a little spottier in that. And you go all the way to the coast and you take any acre of land and you may not find any in that acre. They seem to be more consistent there on that slope. Okay, let's see what we got here. So now I want to do a little satellite study. Back to the maps I was showing you. This is just a screenshot from a fire in Oregon. This one was out near Prineville. I think it was just east of Prineville. There's a pass there you drive over. I don't recall the name of it. And we drove into this burn. This burn had a funny name. It was, I'm drawing a blank. We drove up this road down here in the lower southern quadrant in the west, and we drove up this road, and we went all the way up to the top up here, and we spent 2 hours in here. Then we probably got 2 gallons poking around in here, and it wasn't really what we were looking for. The conditions seemed pretty good, but we weren't finding a lot of mushrooms. And the reason is, if you look at this map, you can see the problem. We should have known before we showed up. And that is, look, you can see the ground, and the trees are pretty widely spaced. And once we get in there, it felt like it had been land that had been like managed with controlled fires and timber cutting, and the trees weren't dense. And when this fire rolled through this spot right here, it didn't really create mayhem. It didn't kill a lot of trees. It just kind of was a quick burn, and it didn't do enough damage. They didn't really fruit very well. And even when they did, there weren't enough trees, and it was kind of sunny. So it wasn't ideal. Now compare that to this. This is just another screenshot from a fire where the forest is just super thick. These trees in here are big and mature, and it's just a beautiful forest. And this is really what we're looking for, is all these kind of heavily forested dark areas. As kind of the prime indicator that burn morels are going to be there. Now, when you zoom in on Google Maps, here's what it looks like. This is like zoomed as far in, and this is just perfect. You can see very little ground in here. The trees are dense, they're tall, they're mature. And in this particular place, the burn severity was pretty low. It ran through, and it didn't really decimate the forest, and we found a huge amount of morels in this area. The sort of picking where you fill a 5-gallon bucket in about an hour and a half, to the top, because you're done. Once your bucket's full, you can't put any more in it, and you're done. Unless you have another bucket or more bags or more stuff. It was as many as you could pick. It was just crazy. Okay, now a few more kind of a summary of what we're looking for. So far, everything's been armchair research. We haven't stepped into the woods. We've done everything from our computer. This is like February and March. We found places that are national forests. That means you're going to have access. They're not wilderness. They're not parks. That was my first slide. We found heavy tree structure. And we verified that by looking at satellite maps. That's number 4. We looked at the Forest Service map for number 2, and we verified, like, I can get to this place. I can drive into it. I can park my car. There's trails that go in. I'm here to tell you, if you're a hiker, there's way more morels for you. I mean, most of us, myself included, I'm pretty lazy. I'm not like, get out of my car and hike 3, 4, 5 miles to start looking. I want to get out of my car and start finding them. So I always say, if you're willing to go a couple miles up a trail, probably nobody's been there. You're going to find a lot. And the Forest Service map has those foot trails on them as well, which is really handy. We're looking at elevation depending on the season. In Oregon, here's the guidelines. I put an anchor around April 1st. That's usually at about, we're going to say 2,000 feet. I would put an anchor around Memorial Day, and that's when you're going to be about 4,500 feet. And so we usually hunt around Memorial Day, and we're typically between 43 and 5. As you go into June and near the end of June, you're going to go all the way up into 5,000 and 6,000 feet. And there are going to be a lot of mushrooms up there. And one of the interesting things is right now, everybody's looking. Everybody's beating a trail to these low elevation burns that are kind of, they're fun, but you can't like load up in them typically. By May, everybody's still looking and the woods are pretty crowded. But by June, as they go up higher in elevation and the summer goes on, less and less people are in the woods. And then when the temperature gets really warm, the mushrooms are going crazy. As long as the rain's coming, the mushrooms are going crazy, but you got these hot days. The commercial pickers are done. They can't, no, the commercial pickers don't want to pick and sell morels that time of year because they can't get fresh ones to market. Now, there might be some for sure picking and drying. But the competition really starts to fade as you get farther into June, and the picking can be just stellar at some of these high elevations. You can have them to yourselves. That's elevation. The tree species we talked about. I'm not too uptight about trees species, especially if I can get that quote unquote mixed forest. Excuse me. Aspect, I'm looking for preferably places I'm going to go to with more northerly exposures or east-west, but not direct south unless the weather's been really moist or cool. And then steepness, I want to find places that I can walk into and not, fall down a hillside or slip down in the mud. So that's my quick checklist before I head into the field. Now, as you head into the field, safety first. I know it's like the 10th slide, but now we're talking about like you're going into the woods. One of the most dangerous things out there is just for small injuries are deep hidden holes. Often a tree burns all the way down into the roots. And if you step into that, they can, you can go to your knee and twist an ankle or twist a knee. You want to watch out for that. However, the thing that'll kill you is going to be flash floods and mud. So if there's big rain that either just came, if it rained heavily, stay out of the woods. It's going to be slippery and awful. Give it a couple days to set. And the roads will wash out. And it's really a dangerous situation in heavy rain. So you're going to want to watch out for that. Wind, when the wind blows, we get out of the woods because it's just kind of creepy when you're in a place with a lot of dead trees and the wind's blowing. You don't want to have a tree fall on your head. I will say on the side of mud, another interesting thing is if you have had a really big rainstorm come through and it's been cold, it will lower the ground temp 10 degrees if it's a big heavy rain. And you might want to just chill out for 3, 4, 5 days, let the ground warm back up, and the mushrooms will absolutely explode. If it's been a kind of more of a warmer rain or a seasonal rain, or maybe not as heavy, often they'll be coming up, the day or two right after the rain, they'll pop pretty quick. So depending on the rain, you might want to wait a few days if it's dropped the soil temperature a lot. And also it's just dangerous. The mud and the ashes is super slippery and not fun to be in. So when you get ready to make your move into the woods, I would encourage you to have multiple options open to go into the burns. And the reason is closures. You never know what you're going to get into, whether the roads close because of a mudslide or whether the roads close because of the Forest Service. I always have 2 or 3 plans, and often my second or third plan is where I'm successful. I usually have several spots marked where I'm going to I know where I'm going to go that represent different elevations and aspects that will hopefully help me figure out where the mushrooms are. I know if I'm finding lots of little mushrooms, I'm a little early, I need to go lower. As you go higher up and you're picking mushrooms, you'll notice within a couple 100 feet, they'll often go from smaller to where you're like, oh, now they're just popping up 200 feet above me. I need to come a little lower. So that can be a sign that you've gone too high. Are small mushrooms. And then look for the right kind of territory when you're there. Often we end up finding them somewhere than our original plan because when we drive around, we see spots we like. So let's take a look at that. Here is a picture this is in Oregon. I think this is, I don't remember what fire this is, but this is the sort of territory you just want walk by, drive past. You can see the ash on the ground. There's some footprints going through there. That ground is dry and it's hot. And frankly, if it rains a lot and mushrooms will pop up there, they're going to be like ashy and you're not going to really enjoy eating them as much. So I usually would avoid this. If I really wanted to, I'd walk back into the back there. You can see some brown on the trees and some green on the ground. That would be the area I would walk straight to and locust back in there. This is a little better. Also in Oregon. And this is a picture from the road. We were just walking down the road and we ended up walking by this spot. It was pretty dry out. It was pretty sun drenched. And even it was better, you know, you see some brown in the trees, some needles, you see some needles on the ground, but not quite what I want, not enough, especially when it was a dry year. There were no mushrooms in there. Now this right here looks good. Here we've got a forest with some living trees and some dead trees mixed together. If you look up in the canopy, there's a lot of brown needles that are still in the air. There's a lot on the ground. There's a nice duff, which is going to give you the benefit. It's going to hold moisture. The mushrooms are going to pop out of that duff. Because they're not surrounded by ash, they're not going to be dirty. They're probably going to be pretty clean when they come out of that duff. And you can't see it in here, but I took this picture. There's like 30 morels down on that slope down the hill here. I don't know how many, a lot. This is out in the Ochoco forest, I think, out in the west. Maybe farther, about Baker City, maybe in that area. And this is really nice. You know, what we're looking at here is a kind of a northern exposure. And all these little trees that are right here close. I love these little 6, 8, 10-foot trees that are half dead with needles on the ground. There's often mushrooms underneath them. They give a nice cover. But really this whole area looks good. If you look in the distance, you can see a little bit of red right there. That's Kristen. That's her red backpack. She's actually on her hands and knees picking mushrooms right there. We're both picking. There's a lot of mushrooms in this area. And just as a beautiful forest with the mixture, you can see the green trees, the living trees in the upper right-hand quadrant over there mixed in. And that's a good sign. I like to see that. Let's see. We got a few tips in here. I'm just looking at the notes. No, I'm not sharing the PowerPoint. Sorry. How common is burns are closed for access the following season? You know, 3 years ago it was uncommon unless, you know, you're near a major city. Last year they shut them all down with COVID and all the timbering going on, and it was awful. This year, I don't know if it's going to be more of the same. I'm not exactly sure what to expect about the closures. Ben says bring a shovel. Yeah, a chainsaw is a nice safety device as well when you're heading out there in case a tree falls and blocks you in. But definitely want to bring some safety gear, and here's some of it. I love walkie-talkies. I feel like they're a huge safety thing to be able to talk to my people I'm hunting with and not yell and not lose them. I'm a huge walkie-talkie fan. The other thing, this is a handy tip if you're going out for the first time. Take wet wipes and hand lotion. Your hands get filthy doing this and dry and uncomfortable. So you're going to want to bring that. You know, bring a nice mushroom knife. I love a knife with a brush on the end because when you're picking, you know, 6,000 morels, you don't want to have your brush and your knife separate from each other because you got 6,000 to pick. You don't have time to mess around. And I like to brush my mushrooms. I like to have them as clean as I can. Bring extra bags because if you hit it, you're going to get more than you know, more than you can carry when they're out. Here's our fingers after a day of picking, and after 2 or 3 days of picking, they wear your pads and your fingerprints right off your fingers. That black soot and spores is really hard on your skin. And man, there's nothing better than getting back to your truck and breaking out and washing that stuff off your hands and putting a little lotion on, I gotta tell you. Here we are. I wanted to show this. One of the realities you're gonna have to deal with, like what to do with all your mushrooms. We like to pick into mesh bags. And the reason is, it's not so much the spores. I don't know that they really need help spreading spores. For me, it's that the dirt falls through and you got to clean your mushroom. If you put them in a bucket, you'll see what I mean. The bottom of the bucket is full of usually crushed, dirty mushrooms, insufferably dirty. You can punch holes in your bucket. That helps. That lets some dirt fall through, lets some airflow. I still prefer a mesh bag to keep them clean. And then usually we dump them out on a table like this and we go through and clean them again. Each one, give it another brush off. And then we usually dry our mushrooms. And here I like to hang them. And this is a herb drying thing I got online. I like to give them a day or two in here to get a head start. And then you can put them in the dehydrator and they dry up real quick. But especially in the field, this is a handy way. I put them all in here. I hang them from a tree, and when we get ready to go, the whole thing collapses, and you can put it right into your vehicle, and then hang it back up when you get a chance. But it's a great problem to have. Now, I said there's not a lot of bugs. One of the beauties of bird morels, and many people that pick morels in the East and Midwest, in the Southeast, they have problems with bugs, and they have all kinds of, like washing their mushrooms in salt water to get rid of bugs, bug mitigation techniques. For most of the bird morel hunting you're going to do, except at the early low elevation ones, there's no bugs in the mushrooms. They're not eating the mushrooms. They're bug free. You don't have to do anything to get rid of bugs. However, you will see this bug right here, a little hopper bug. It lives on the outside of the mushroom. It seems to have like a little silk that it leaves too, a webbing. It doesn't like burrow in like a maggot and eat the mushroom. But if you're seeing these, it usually means your mushrooms are a little long in the tooth, a couple days old. I suggest you go into higher elevations if you can and find some fresher ones. But they are what they are. They're not bad. If you do get them though, you want to be careful if you bring a bag of these home into your living room. You're likely to have 150 bugs spreading out over the next 6 hours across your living room. If you do get these, you're going to want to brush them off. They fall off in the dehydrator really, really well, but they crawl off if you let your mushrooms like sit in your car. You will have 150 or 200 of these little bugs crawling around your car. So be warned of these little guys. They're not the worst thing, but they're there sometimes. I don't remember the name of them. I did. Sorry, Tara, I missed some questions. Let me scroll back and answer a few. Somebody says, I thought cedar didn't support mycorrhizal connections. I don't know about that. I know that burn morels grow in the cedars. So, Joe, I may have you kind of keep track of any other questions I can answer in here. Now, the second year after the burn, Anthony, that's a lot of people have been asking that. Now's as good as time to any to address it. Burn morels will grow typically the first 3 years after a burn. Typically, they grow the best the first year and the worst the third year, and the second year is somewhere in between. That said, if you rope off an acre in a burn and you visit first year, second year, third year, and you come back to catch multiple flushes, you just can't go once. And the weather is good, you're going to find plenty of burn morels in the year two, I feel like. Not as many as the first year. And you'll see some, so there's been some research that came out of some Alaskan forest fires where they found something like 4 times as many mushrooms the first year as the second year, but they were like 6 times bigger the second year. So at the end of the day, they had more weight in second year harvest than the first year harvest. And I caution you, this is not how it works. This is just that one fire they visited in Alaska and that season when they visited. Generally speaking, you're going to do better in first year burns. However, second year burns are delightful. I would encourage you to visit them. There's no competition. There's no like Forest Service people bugging you if you're worried about that. The forest itself is generally a lot less burnt. It's very green. It's like a buffet for wildlife. There's a lot of wildlife in it. And you're going to find morels. I don't know if I was a commercial picker and I needed to make my living, I think I'd be careful with the second year burns because they're riskier. But we went into a third year burn down by Crater Lake, 2 years ago, and just got a beautiful basket of big, just beautiful morels. And a third year burn and had a really nice time walking through the burn because everything was turning green again. So I would say check them out. Check out the second and third year burns, and I think you might be surprised. Some of them will produce pretty well. However, if it's not rainy and the weather's not right, they won't produce. Something about burn morels are quite gritty, especially after rain. How do you get the grit off them? Yeah, good luck. You can wash them. You can totally wash your morels, in my opinion. The trick is to take them out and let them get them to air dry back to their original temperature before you do anything with them. Like if you're going to dehydrate them, you got to let them dry out first. And sometimes I wash morels. I don't like to, but if they're really gritty, that's the problem with picking morels that are in ash. The best advice, Pam, is to go find morels that are growing in the duff where the ash is not splashing on them. I've picked dirty morels too, but I don't enjoy it because they just get that grit on them and they're hard to get off. Okay. I would say at this point, if you still have a question that didn't get answered, pop it in there again, get it down near the bottom where we'll see it. Joe's going to read a few because we've gone about an hour now and I'm just wrapping up here. I want to show this one. You got to get a permit. This is a week. These are, first of all, look at the date on this. These were seized the 4th of July weekend. So that's pretty late. The mushrooms were going crazy that year in 2016. There was a big burn and it was in Crater Lake National Park. However, a big chunk of the burn was outside of the park. You could have gone and loaded up on this burn early in July. And it was right next to the road. But a lot of people picked in the park where the elevation was high, like 6,000 feet. And the 234 pounds, I think there were like 12 or 13 people in total that got tickets on this from the National Park Service. I don't know what they did with these morels, but this is not a dish rag covered with morels. This is a giant blanket covered with morels. There's a lot of them there. It's pretty interesting. You can't get a permit there though. The way permits work are every forest has its own permit in Oregon, and some will share permits, but that's unusual. Every forest has its own rules. So anybody that tells you, here's the rule, they don't know what they're talking about because they're different. Generally speaking, you can pick a certain amount for free. You may have to get a permit. Some don't require a permit. They typically require you cut them in half. So in your average forest, you might be able to pick 2 gallons if they're cut in half without getting a permit. Typically, commercial permits are $20, and typically they're good for 10 days. You have to buy them in a ranger station, and any permits you got to get in a ranger station, which by the way are closed on weekends, and they close at like 4:30 on Friday. You got to get there early. Often they're free though for a free permit, but every forest is different. You got to look where you're picking, and you got to go online and research and know what the rules are for that forest. There is no monolithic rule across Oregon.
There's a question that came up at the very bottom.
Okay.
The question about the best practice for picking selectively and maybe leaving some behind.
Man, I'm the wrong guy to ask. I'm the wrong guy to ask that question. The reason is I feel like burn morels are this unique thing. They only come up after a burn. They sit in the woods in the roots for 50 years. And when they come up in massive quantities and they have a very short lifespan. And as far as I can tell, no animal eats them. And you can say what you want in the chat about that. No animal eats them, other than maybe bugs as they rot. I think you can pick away. I think they're already there. They're with the trees. You could pick. It's so egotistical. Like, how would you pick them all? You're talking, this is 40 square miles. Pick all you can pick. You haven't even come close to touching what's out there. So I don't think there's a whole, I know it's not popular to say it. I wouldn't say this with other mushrooms. I don't think there's a lot of concern about over picking burn morels specifically. You're not going to hurt the morels. They come, when they do come, they come in vast quantities, and then they won't be back for another 50 years. So sorry, I know that's probably not a popular view of things, and I wouldn't say it about other mushrooms.
There's another question here about vegetation. Someone asks about a mixed hardwood conifer forest, in particular, a conifer forest that also has oak slash madrone?
I don't know. I know down in Southern Oregon, you've got that going on. I have not had any experience in a burn where I've been in and seen madrone and been picking burn morels. I know people have, though. So I think I can't answer that. I'm sorry. I'm usually up at higher elevations, focused on that. Now, I will point out that many people think, and I think you might have to be a geologist, but this area in Southern Oregon, down here in the southwestern corner, down into California, has a different sort of mineral in the earth. The geology is different. And generally, this little area here is not as popular for picking morels for that reason. And I know there's madrones in there too. But sorry, I don't have a specific answer on the deciduous trees that are mixed with the conifers, other than I don't think the mushrooms are with the deciduous trees. I think they're with the conifers. So that's what you should pay attention to. How did I do, Joe? Are there more questions?
I have a question for you, which is, are you aware of any research about burn morels possibly accumulating heavy metals or any other health issues for burn morels specifically?
Yeah, I don't think there's any research on that. I've looked. Certainly there's research on morels that have been growing in apple orchards and have been picking up on the pesticides and herbicides and the heavy metals that come as part of that in the East. Certainly if there's heavy metals in the ground, I think morels are going to pull them up and you're going to eat them. And that might be a problem in, Colorado, where we have mining going on and have that stuff in the ground. But I don't think there's been any specific research on that I have ever seen.
Did you want to talk about your next slide here? I think that's important.
Yeah. So, I didn't really cover this, but you guys know, right? Like, these are not morels. This here, if you can't tell that that's not a morel, you might want to be a little more careful before you go into the woods. And this is also not a morel. It's a close relative, but it's not. So I didn't want to make this my class, like how to ID a morel. But you might want to, kind of realize and look at this. Like if you wonder about this, it's not a morel, and this could potentially make you really sick, depending on a number of factors. These gyrometras and burpas. A little etiquette, I think the biggest problem in the woods is in these burns are trash. That's the worst thing ever. I think when people leave trash in the woods, don't pick where you're not, don't pick on private property. That's never cool to pick on somebody else's land. It's just not cool. Share your catch. Oh my gosh, there's so many of these. When you get a big bucket of them, spread them around to your friends, introduce some other people. Share the love. Take someone new. There's more mushrooms out there than you know what to do with on a burn. Fill your car up with people. I think people should be out getting these. They're not a secret. They're not going to be in the same spot year after year. They're going to follow the burns. I think it's a unique opportunity to share mushrooming with people where you're not taking them to your secret spot. In a week, this spot is never going to be a spot again. Take people, enjoy it. If there's a lot of commercial pickers out there, a couple pieces of advice. Number one is you can always go to steep areas. Those don't get picked. You can always follow commercial pickers. They don't pick all of them. They're still going to leave hundreds for you to pick. And number three is you can go a little deeper. You can go a little further. But sometimes it's funny with commercial pickers. They're doing that too. I often do the opposite. We'll stay along the roads and can do surprisingly well. It's when there's a lot of amateurs like us, like hobbyists, they will often everybody parks their car in the same spot and does the same thing. Try driving down a road and parking where there's no parking within a half a mile of your car. That's where you want to get out and look. But often they're right next to the road. Even when there's a lot of commercial activity, you can still find a lot of little nooks and crannies that the commercial hunters miss. So don't let those guys scare you off. We've always picked with lots of other hunters around us and never had any problem finding all that we wanted for our personal consumption. We are not commercial pickers. We don't sell our mushrooms. I mean, maybe at a farmer's market, we might sell some occasionally, but we're not like, we don't make our living doing this, and we very rarely sell them. So that I feel like it's easy to get a couple gallons, which are enough to keep people like us happy. I'd say see you out there. There's some beautiful things out there. There's a bird's nest I found in a burn there on the left with some eggs in it. And these are our e-bikes that we use. We often head up into burns on roads and trails on the bikes, which is a fun way to get past a bad road or an inaccessible spot and get deep up into a burn to find, virgin territory full of mushrooms. Do we have any more questions coming, Joe?
There are none that I noticed. Let me, there's someone who said you skipped my question twice, and now I'm trying to find the question. Which are the tastiest?
Oh, I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm allergic to morels. They make me throw up. But I've tasted them many times and I've thrown up many times. I keep trying to think I will like them like I did when I was a kid. Everybody's got an opinion. I think everybody likes their local morel the best or their local chanterelle the best. Everybody has a different opinion. I think a lot of it depends, and the reason why there's a lot of differentiation is: did you pick it? Was it like a fresh morel when you picked it? Did you take care of it and dry it nicely? I think if you do that, you won't have any qualms, and you can argue over what's best. They do taste a little different, but I don't know that one is necessarily better than the other of wild morels. I'm not talking about cultivated or landscape morels. I personally like the tomentosas because they're heavy and they're a lot heavier when you carry them out. But because you can tell when you cook them, I do cook them a lot and I taste them all the time. They're very thick and they have a really nice mouthfeel. So I really personally like the tomentosas, but I think blindfold testing, I can't say that one is better than the other, although people are really opinionated about that.
Well, thank you very much, Trent. This has been a wonderful presentation with a lot of great hints for how people can find spots and what to do once you're in there to get the morels. And awesome. With that, we'll let you go and wish everyone a great mushroom hunting season for morels and other mushrooms.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, Trent.
Yeah, I don't know if we're still on here.
Well,